Hello. Today we visit r/AskReddit to see what is your family's deepest, darkest secret. Make sure to comment your favorite drink. I have done my best to find the most interesting ones in between all of the more mature stories. This is my warning that some of these stories are for mature audiences, so don't complain you weren't warned. With that, sit back and enjoy. My father was the most caring man. He loved his family. One day, when I was 6 years old, I came home with bleeding cuts on my legs from the babysitter's beating. With no warning, he jumps in his car and heads to the babysitter's house. My mom had no car, so me and her catch a bus to the babysitter's house. By the time we got there, the police were there, the husband was in an ambulance, and some of the living room furniture was thrown out the window. My father had kicked in the front door and beat up the husband. He couldn't get to the wife because she locked herself in a room, so he started throwing furniture out the window. If he would have got to her, he would have killed her. Never knew my father could get so angry. He only spent 2 nights in jail because all the police understood. The mother was charged with child abuse. I still have the scars. Your dad went Ray Velcoro on them. I'd probably do the same if I saw this, to be honest. It would be everything for me to restrain myself and go through the courts instead. I'd rather do jail time, and I wouldn't regret it for a second. My dad owned a construction company and was very blue-collar. My sister and I were brought up to work from a young age. She got her first job at 13 in a local berry-picking farm. My dad was really proud of her and would smile when she would come home tired and exhausted, covered in berry juice. About a month of this goes by and my sister is getting more and more depressed. My dad takes notice and tries to cheer her up, gives her the, "you just gotta push through" talk. A few days later he gets home and she was home early. He asked what happened and she explained she got in an argument with her boss. Initially he was upset, but then he found out her boss had not been paying her for the hours she was working and was not paying the rate she had been promised. He saw red, grabbed his shotgun and drove right to that farm. Got there and found out the owner was abusing his workers and employing tons of undocumented children to work for him who were living there in squalor conditions. He got my sister's money, in cash, and told him if he ever called my sister again he would find him himself and shoot off his hands. Then he reported them to our state's labor board, followed the case, and got them shut down. Make no mistake, my dad could be a colossal asshole. But I will always respect him for stuff like this. He always watched out for us and I really admire that. Jesus Christ. Reading through all of these truly disgusting stories and I'm over here thinking about how my mom's no-bake cheesecake, which has been brought to every family gathering for 25+ years and is adored by everyone, is just a recipe that she found on the back of a pre-made graham cracker crust. Yikes. Nestle Toulouse has entered the chat. You Americans always butcher the French language. OMG. Same with my mom's pumpkin pie. Growing up, I always thought it was a recipe handed down to her. It was my favorite pumpkin pie, and would tell everyone that mom's was the best. Turns out, the recipe is on the side of Libby's canned pumpkin. My DNA was connected to cold case. I had no connection to the crime, a close relative did. There are some murderers who had thought they got away with it but are now losing sleep over 23andMe. That's my story, but with 2 more crazy and also shitty for me twists. Story time. Okay, so I'm in my late 30s now. About 4 years ago I was contacted by a homicide detective from an Indianapolis suburb I grew up in. They needed a DNA sample from me. I was reluctant, most because, well, what the duck? They told me that the cold case is from 1994. They asked if I remember anything big in 1994. I was 9 going on 10. I said I do. My mother used to walk me and my brother all the time while my father was gone most of the time at work. She was a stay-at-home mom. I forgot I have a little brother 4 years younger. Anyway, my mother mentioned a newborn baby that was found stabbed to death in a dumpster. Kids found the baby while looking through the dumpster. I was big news then. I just knew through my mother. Anyway, the police then asked about my home life. How was my upbringing? Was I touched? Did I get fed? Did I ever see my mother pregnant? So a woman 3 years ago got on Ancestor Registry because she was a foster child, wanted to find her parents. That DNA got matched with what is now to me my dead baby sister. It got weirder too. The father that I knew all my life was not my father, nor was he my brother's father. My brother and I share the same father, and the dead baby is related to him and I through my mother. My mother died 5 years ago and my father, but not father is still alive but not very helpful with the case at all. The police think he's full of shit. He was a super piece of shit. Both my parents were. It's what made me a superhero though. My paternal grandfather had a girlfriend, on the side the entire time I knew him. When my grandmother died, he married her and completely disregarded us until right before he died. It was a life-changing lesson on how people you truly think you know, have secrets. My husband's grandfather divorced his grandmother and married her sister, my husband's great-aunt. The great-aunt just stepped into grandma role and everyone just accepted it while his grandmother lived in poverty and didn't see her own children. This was super traumatic for the kids who knew and loved their grandma and had her replaced by a similar looking, but entirely different person. He told me it was a surreal time for him. My great-great-grandmother and her sister killed their neighbor in 1916 because he assaulted my great-grandmother. The man was known around town as a predator and there was never an investigation. The sheriff's deputies just took his body away and the town buried it in an unmarked grave. I'm not usually pro-vigilante justice but honestly sometimes killing the local pedophile, rapist might be the best fix. Fun fact, there exists something called jury nullification. It's a byproduct of double jeopardy. But functionally it means the spirit of the law can ignore the letter of the law when needed. The jury can vote that the murderer of a pedophile is innocent and no one can do a thing about it. Because sometimes justice is not the law. Not really a secret, but my grandfather never talked about it until he was 80 years old, and was crying and shaking while telling us the story. But he insisted on telling us so we would know. He was living in a small village in France in a rural family. It was very quiet, in the middle of nowhere. But in a winter day of 1943, armed German Nazis came into the village early in the morning and gathered every single inhabitant and aligned them in front of a wall at sunrise. My grandpa was 6 years old at the time and was put in front of the wall too with his family. The Nazis suspected the villagers to hide resistance in the houses, so they started to search every single house, while pointing guns at the villagers in front of the wall, who were all terrified and freezing. The main officer started screaming at the villagers, and my grandpa remembers what he said in his German accent. "Where are the resistance? Where did you hide them? Tell us. We gonna kill you all right here." He was repeating this over and over, while looking very threatening. There was no resistant in the village, the ones that were housed in the village left weeks before. The villagers didn't say anything. They were certain they were gonna be killed anyway. The moms started to ask their children to be spared. But the Germans didn't listen. They kept threatening the villagers as they were searching the entire place. The wait lasted for hours, with some soldiers standing still in front of the row of villagers while others were still searching. When the search ended, the soldiers came back with some loot but clearly didn't find any sign of the resistance. The main officer told the villagers that he was keeping an eye on them and decided to leave without killing anyone that day. But the Germans took a young woman with them before leaving, who was unrelated to my grandfather. The villagers never saw or heard about this woman again. My grandfather was left traumatized after this event and never wanted to forgive Germany for the war. He always remained hateful towards Germans. But after hearing his story we could finally understand why. My ex-husband's grandmother disappeared in the 70s. Her head was found several years later. It remains unsolved. My ex-husband, a few others and I believe it was his grandpa who was a struggling alcoholic and just an awful person. No one in his family speaks of it. I only found out due to a friend of a friend knowing his grandma. He found out when he was 16 after a newspaper published a short article on the case. His parents flipped and made the newspaper retract it. Small towns can hold a lot of secrets. My great-uncle was a hitman, and during his time in jail he sent his immediate family a bunch of letters. My grandma still has them, but as far as I know she's the only person alive who's read them. Someday we'll find out what he wrote, but my grandma says she wants to burn them. I don't know if she ever will. We have many. One that can't be held against us at this point. I was a very sick baby. My dad worked 2 full-time jobs to get 2 separate insurance policies. Spent 22.5 months in a children's hospital type sick. So when they released me, the doctor discharging told my parents he highly recommended a heart and respiratory monitor. Then only my pediatrician could prescribe it or insurance wouldn't pay. We were super poor and had no way to finance it alone. So when we went to see my pediatrician, he advised against it, stating that it wasn't necessary. Now by this point the doctor that had been caring for me in the hospital had been calling daily to check on me. She was adamant it was needed. My dad, until we got one, had been laying awake at night with me on his chest to monitor my breathing, more than once having to do a sternum rub to restart my breathing. So Dad goes back to visit the doctor with just me. Now the story goes he asked the nurse to step out and immediately slams the door and locks it. Picks this doctor up by the throat and as calm and cold as could be said, "My son needs this, you're the only thing stopping that. If he dies because he didn't have it, I will come back here and make you suffer. Then my wife will sue your family into the ground and make them suffer." We left with a prescription and a new doctor. Side note, yes, this was extreme behavior. But I'm glad. That machine saved my life no less than a dozen times. When my dad passed away, my dad didn't have life insurance, so we had to start a GoFundMe to pay for his funeral and money for us for like college and or life in general. 25% of the GoFundMe money went to us and the rest towards the funeral. By the way, $15,000 was raised, and at the funeral there was a box to put envelopes with money in them to go straight to us, which raised another $6,000. Well, when it was time to collect our money, we all only got $1,400 each. We all were a little confused because we knew how much was supposed to go to us in the first place, but we were thinking we were gonna get them in payments to accurately count it. So I asked my uncle politely where the rest is, and he said that's at. My siblings immediately knew something was wrong. We did the math and we all were supposed to get 3x more the amount we got originally. So we all talked to them and asked what happened to all of it. They all said that's it and immediately got defensive. So my uncle, the one that hated all my other family, looked into it. My family took $8,000 from the GoFundMe and also another $4,000 from the envelopes. We saw all the transactions and wire transfers from all the accounts and also the bills. When we confronted them and showed the evidence, they said it was our uncle that helped us figure out who it was. The only reason why I knew it wasn't him was because he didn't have access to the GoFundMe account. Only they did. My dad passed away 5.5 years ago and they still haven't admitted it, and all my siblings cut them off and they blame us. So now I don't have really any family and don't celebrate holidays. You should call the police. This is fraud and embezzlement. I don't know if this is a deep, dark secret. My dad is an illegitimate son of an ex-judge and belongs to a powerful political family. His mom, my grandma, was an escort. My grandma disliked him growing up. I think all of these ruined my father. He was a smart man, but he became alcoholic and spent money on prostitutes. He also physically abused my mom. My mom and dad separated when I was in first year in uni. We've had so much hatred against my father back then, and have gone no contact. I've only come to realize how my father was mentally ill. I would want to look for him, but at the same time I'm very afraid and don't know where to start. I've also moved countries. With that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching all the way until the end, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your favorite drink. Until next time.